name is Emily Scott, and I am the Guest and Next Steps Director here at Woods Chapel. And I am so excited to get to be up and sharing the message today. So usually I don't get to be up here and sharing the good news. Usually I am out running around, and I get to serve with the amazing guest services team, which is anyone you see wearing a green lanyard, and they are the ushers, the people over at the hub, the greeters at the doors, at the coffee bar, making sure that we have a great Sunday morning. So here is the plug. If you're looking for a great way to serve, come join us. We're a pretty fun team. But the other thing about my job that I've learned has become one of the more important parts of my job that I wasn't aware of is besides providing radical hospitality, it's also my job to prevent hostility by making sure this is always here on Sunday mornings. Yes, I am the person that makes sure that the coffee bar is stocked and we have donuts on Sunday morning because, because church just goes a little bit better with a little sugar and caffeine. Am I right? Amen. All right. So today I get to share the story with you about an individual other than Jesus who is probably talked about the most in the Bible and influenced the Christian faith the most. And as a reminder, throughout this entire series of Long Story Short, we've been looking at these two main ideas that are kind of the DNA that flows through all of these stories. And if you've been here the past few weeks, what are they? Go ahead and shout them out. Yes, I heard it throughout, relationship and responsibility. So yes, the relationship, not only our relationship with God, but how God desires a relationship with us. And just like any relationship, there has to be responsibility too. And because of this relationship we have with God, we have the opportunity to make God known into the world and be more like God with our actions. So the stories in the Bible showcase the best and the worst parts of this relationship and responsibility, and we get a glimpse into God's vision for us. So today, we're going to dive into the long story of Moses. Now, for those of you keeping track, the whole point of this series is to get through the whole Bible by the end of the summer. And the story of the story of Moses takes place in Exodus, which is the second book of the Bible, and there's 66 books totals in the Bible. So, we're really making progress. We're on the second book, and we're making our way there by the end of the summer. But Moses lived about 500 years after Abraham. And if you missed last week's sermon, Aaron talks all about Abraham's life, so I encourage you to go back and catch that message. But that positions him about 1,500 years before Christ. And during this time, the Israelite people, also known as the Hebrew people, were slaves in Egypt. Now, the Pharaoh at this time wanted to be sure that this huge population of people never got enough power to rise up and throw him off of his throne. So he created this command that for any Hebrew boy that was born, they should be killed immediately after they were born. And wouldn't you know it, this sets the scene because right after this command comes out, Moses is born. Now, before we jump too far into Moses' story, I want to give a couple reminders that we talk about each week. Like Aaron says, I encourage you to go to the reflection guides that are on our website. There is so much rich history and events that happen in Moses' life that we're just kind of barely get to skim the surface of today. So I encourage you to go and dive deeper with those reflection guides throughout the week. And then I also encourage you to take notes because that way it is better for you to absorb this information and ultimately absorb this information for your relationship with God, but then so you can go out and share this with others and be those hands and feet of God in the world and sharing the good news. So that's why we have these notebooks in the hub for anyone that wants one, whether you're new or if you call Woods Chapel home, you can also pick one up, and the price that it costs will cover the cost so that first-time guests can have it for free because we value the note-taking so much. So jumping back into Moses, so Moses' mother hears that her son is now in danger. And so she tries to hide him away, but realizes that that's not going to work. Because I can tell you, as a mother of a 7-month-old, trying to hide this would be near impossible. I can't even keep him quiet sometimes enough to go through the drive-thru and get my coffee or take a cute Easter picture, let alone quiet enough that he could stay hidden and no one would even know that he existed. So this mother had to make this incredible choice to put Moses in the basket and place him in the reeds where she knew that the Pharaoh's daughter would bathe. The Pharaoh's daughter found Moses, took him home, and raised him as her own. So here's Moses, who grew up in luxury, had all of the trappings of wealth, and was raised as royalty. But this whole time, he knows that he is an Israelite and wants to know more about his own people. So at the age of 40, he finally goes out into the city to meet his people and to see what they're all about and learn from them. And right when he goes out, one of the very first things that he sees is an Egyptian foreman beating an Israelite slave. And Moses becomes so enraged at seeing this injustice that he kills that foreman right on the spot. And he knew that once word got back to Pharaoh, which, reminder, was his adopted grandfather, that there would be a warrant out for his head. So he ran as far as he could to get away to hopefully protect his life. And this brought him to a tribe led by Jethro, who was a shepherd, and he got adopted into this tribe and became a shepherd. Now, during this time, this wasn't simply like a new career change, because a shepherd was seen as the lowest of the low. So there were even laws that were created that herds could not get too close to cities or villages, because the shepherds were seen as so unclean that even them being near the village would taint the village. So they were seen as uncivilized, dirty, doing back-breaking work with absolutely no societal perks. So we went from royalty all the way down to a shepherd. He does this for 40 years. So by this time, he's around 80 years old, and he's had a lot of time looking down over his sheep, which also means he's had a lot of time with himself and his thoughts. And then one day, while he's looking down, looking over his sheep, he finally looks up and he sees a burning bush. And he hears the voice of God telling him to go back to Egypt and set God's people free, take them out of Egypt so they can worship God together. So after getting this message, he goes back and asks his adopted family to set the people free. He brings them through the Red Sea. They wander in the desert for 40 years to the promised land that God has promised the Israelites. Whew. That's a lot. So what is the point of all of this crazy story? Moses sets these people free and confronts his adopted family so they could get lost in the desert for 40 years. Plus, all of these people are expected to follow the person who used to be part of the family that made them slaves to begin with, and then went all the way to a lowly shepherd is now their leader. Here's what I gather from all of this, is that all of this crazy story, all of this that happens to Moses before the burning bush and before he dedicates his life over to God, is summarized in 15 chapters of the Bible. 15. Everything after he's dedicated his life over to God, after they're in the wilderness and as they are working to serve God together and have God map out his life, it's laid out in 123 chapters of the Bible. I think sometimes we get really busy in our lives and our responsibilities and attempting to be productive, keeping all of our sheep in order, that we never look up and see our own burning bush, where God is inviting us to, instead of doing it ourselves, why not we do something together? In Exodus 20, we see God has invited Moses to the top of Mount Sinai and starts telling Moses about this new covenant or relationship that God wants to have with the Israelites. So this is where we have the 10 Commandments, but we also have over 600 rules that are mapped out. And these can all be found in the first 5 books of the Bible, which is also known as the Torah. So Moses is up there for 40 days. Can you see a trend? We really like 40. But he's up there for 40 days just being in the presence of God, listening and preparing to carry this message back down to the Israelites here at the bottom of the mountain. Now, can you imagine sitting in prayer for 40 days, doing nothing else? I don't know about you, but I hate silence. I hate it. If I'm home alone, the TV will be on or a podcast will be on. I can't drive in the car without the radio on. I hate silence. Because normally when I'm in silence, one of 3 things typically happen. Number 1, my brain just goes into overdrive. I start thinking of everything I need to be doing, everything I probably should have done yesterday, everything that I need to be doing tomorrow, and I just get all caught up in everything that I should be doing instead of sitting and maybe just praying. I get so caught up in everything else. The second thing that happens when I sit in silence is I find out that I'm really not the nicest person to myself. Pascal, the man who created the calculator, says, "We distract ourselves because silence brings up our negative parts to ourselves." There's nowhere to run in silence, and we can often be our meanest critics. I know that I say things to myself that no one else would ever say to me, or I would never say to anyone else. And the third thing that happens is that silence can scare me. Because what if I spend all of this time in silence, praying and trying to listen to God, and I don't hear anything? Can you relate to any of those? Because this was definitely the case for the Israelites. So as Moses is up on this mountain having this incredible experience with God, all of the Israelites are kind of just at the bottom of the mountain hanging out, waiting to figure out what's happening next. And so they've been freed from slavery, so they're ready to do something. What can we do? So they go to Aaron, which is Moses' brother, and asks how they can be more productive while Moses is gone. And here's what the scripture says. When the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people gathered around Aaron and said to him, "Come, make gods for us, who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him." Aaron said to them, "Take off your gold rings that are on the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me." So all the people took off their gold rings from their ears and brought them to Aaron. He took these from them, formed them in a mold, and cast an image of a calf. And they said, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." Now, at first glance, this story is wild. It doesn't even appear that there was a conversation, because what it looks like is the people are lost because they don't know what happened to their leader. So the obvious choice is to melt down all of their jewelry and make a sculpture out of a cow and then worship it. What? They were so willing to abandon the God that freed them from slavery and just wanted to have something physical that they could hold on to, something that they could tangibly see and point to and say, "Yep, that's going to keep me safe. This is my God." Now, it's easy to look at that story and blame the Israelites for having a weak faith that was so quick to abandon God. However, I think it paints a pretty clear image of how quickly we panic and take things in our lives into our own hands when we don't see God working the way that we want God to work. When we don't see God, we tend to fill in the gaps for ourselves, and we become an Aaron. Don't tell Pastor Aaron I said that, but we do. We become an Aaron. We cling to whatever we can get our hands on, anything that we see valuable in, anything that we can hold on to and mold and craft into what we want it to be, so we can hold it up and say, yep, this is going to keep me safe. This is what I need to get through today. However, when we do that, when we think that we can be more productive or outwork God, we end up missing God's plan for us. We get so caught up in filling up these potholes that are making our life bumpy that we completely miss the road that God is paving for us. When I was a junior in high school, I almost made an idol or working to fill those bumps in my road that could have completely changed the whole directory of my life. And you know the thing about it, it wasn't even a scary idol. I think sometimes when we think about these idols, we think that there's something that's really bad or scary. But for me, my idol was that I wanted to be a teacher. I wanted to be a speech and debate teacher because debate was my passion in high school. And I wanted to be a speech and debate teacher because I knew the plan. I knew that if I went to college, I filled all of the boxes. I did everything that I was supposed to do. I knew that I could do it, and that would be my plan, and that was safe. And I knew exactly what I was doing, and I had a plan. So I went to church camp that summer, like I said, before my junior year, and we were talking about, everyone going off to college, getting ready for college, where they were in their high school career, and I was there, and I was saying, I've already been applying to colleges. I already know what I'm doing. I'm going to be a speech and debate teacher. And throughout that week of church camp, I had 3 separate counselors come up and question me about that decision. And one specifically came up and said, you know what, Em? I think you're making a mistake here. I think you really need to consider going into ministry. And you know what? There in that moment, I was so angry. He didn't know me. He was a counselor at camp. He didn't know how much time I had poured into speech and debate, how much energy and effort I had poured into this, how much it meant to me. I had already told all my friends and all my teachers that I was going to be a teacher. I couldn't go back on that now. And most importantly, I could still love God and be a teacher. I was so angry that he thought he could tell me what I should do. But really, when I think about it, what he also didn't know, and what even I was scared to admit to myself, is that I had poured so much of my identity in high school into my speech and debate. And I really wasn't sure what was going to be left or what it had all been for if I wasn't going to get to do it as a career full time. I was scared to let it go. I was too busy looking down at this future life I had constructed for myself, keeping it all in order, keeping the plan just the way I thought it needed to be, that even when someone personally invited me to look up and see a burning bush, I got angry. I finished my week at camp and went home still determined to follow my own path and become a teacher. However, here's the thing about God. Even when we mess up and don't stop to listen, God keeps talking. So it was a couple weeks after camp, and I was at home, and I woke up in the middle of the night unable to go back to sleep. And I really hadn't thought about this comment from my counselor or anything in weeks, but for whatever reason that night, I could not get it out of my head. So after literally a couple hours of wrestling with this and not being able to go back to sleep, I got out of bed and got on my knees, and I remember I specifically prayed, God, if you are wanting me to go into ministry, just give me the call. Now, this is a true story. There in the middle of the night, alone in my room, I had this moment of silence with God. And as soon as I finished the prayer and asked for the call, my phone started ringing. It was in that moment that I knew that God had paved a whole new road for me. And I can honestly say that I have never wavered on my career since that night. There's been some detours, but I have always known that some form of ministry is where I'm going. I woke up that next morning and told my parents that I was going in a whole new direction. Now, the literal side of my brain knows that when my phone did start ringing, I saw the caller ID, and it was my boyfriend, who's now my husband, calling me. He claims he doesn't remember making that call in the middle of the night, and it could have just been a fluke. Regardless if it was divine intervention, a coincidence, or just an accidental dial on the behalf of Kyle, it meant something to me. Just like many of the stories that we're looking at in this series, it's more about the lessons that we can pull from these stories than the literal interpretation of them that's important. Because it was a moment where I stopped trying to force my own agenda. I stopped building an idol of what I thought my future should be and allowed God into my plans. Now, let me be incredibly clear and incredibly real that I have had countless prayers with God, asking questions, pleading on my knees, and it doesn't always end in a clear answer like it did that night. Often I have to be patient and see how God is working, and there are times that I'm not sure if God's going to answer my prayer at all. There are times that we can get so angry and cry out and wonder if God is even listening to us at all. But there is a good news here. There's two things. First, the good news is that it is okay to be angry with God. God can take it. And the second thing is that God sees the promised land that we cannot yet see. Even when we are deep at what feels like the wilderness and we feel that all hope is lost and we're stuck trying to build our own idols, God knows that some of our best moments are right on the horizon and we just can't see them yet. We just have to learn to be patient, and then the hard part, listen and respond to what God is saying. If you're like me and learning to embrace that silence is very difficult for you, if that makes you want to cringe just a little bit, I want to give you, this is a way to pray or a meditation. So the next time you wake up in the night and can't go back to sleep, instead of reaching for a book or reaching for your phone, I want you to try this simple prayer. It's from Psalms 46:10. And we're going to practice it right now. So whether you are here in person or online, I invite you to close your eyes. And it simply starts by praying and meditating, "Be still and know that I am God." God, the creator of the universe, loves you. For you. The same God that created the universe wants to have a personal relationship with you. When you are done with that, you take that same prayer and you shorten it and simply meditate on "be still and know." know that God loves you, not based on your productivity level or your image in the world, but for simply being you. And then finally, pray, be. Just be. Find contentment in just being in the presence of God. It is enough. You are enough. You are worthy and enough. And because you are valuable in God's eyes, God has big plans for you, even if you can't see it. All right, you can open your eyes. The story of Moses is truly the story of you and me. It's so easy to get stuck down there at the bottom of the mountain, trying to be productive and start filling our time that don't really feed into our relationship with God. However, if we can learn to look up from all of the things that we are trying to keep track of, if we can learn to look up and listen to God's nudges, we can be part of something greater than we could ever imagine. We just have to be willing to answer the call whenever it's sent. And for today, that is a long story short.